Welcome everyone. This is the Heroes podcast again with a new episode with Nathan Segal. How are you, Nathan?
I'm fine, thank you. Good to see you again.
Good to connect. Before you start, I just wanted to tell the audience who you are. And you've been running affiliate marketing. I think that's how we have been connecting campaigns. You worked through internet marketing for 17 years and 24 years as a freelance writer, and published over 1,000 times in magazines and written 11 books. Well, how did you do this? I mean, how did your life started off to get here?
Well, that's funny actually, because the whole freelance writing journey started when I got fired from a job. And I had just moved from Vancouver to Victoria, brand new city. I was only in town for, let me think, 7 weeks or something like that. And my boss and me didn't see eye to eye. And it turns out that I wasn't all that qualified for the job either. There were things he was asking me to do that I wasn't qualified at all to do. I didn't know them, to be really honest. And it finally got to a point where there were all sorts of problems with the students. Most of them weren't qualified to be there at all. They had gotten there under some sort of grant program from the Canadian government. But I would say there were only 2 people out of about 15 who were actually qualified to be there. And the rest were, I don't know, filling up space. Anyway, we wound up with a major conflict. And the people there decided to replace me with one of the students, seriously, and they fired me. And so here I was in Victoria without any prospects at all. And my cousin Marty Waterman came up to me after 2 weeks of this and just not knowing what to do at all. And he comes up to me and he says to me, "Hey, would you learn how to write? Would you like to learn how to write?" I had no prospects and said, sure. But I mean, the postscript to it actually, or a side journey from it is, he asked me 6 months ago before that, or 6 months before to do that. And I said no, because I figured my life was going to be filled with paper and I like a bit of a nomadic lifestyle, not too much stuff around me. And as it turns out, I was right about the paper, but that's how I got started. And he basically showed me this writing course that he'd created. And then we went down to the library and he showed me all these books in the resource section. And the number one series of books that I wound up using were the Gales Directory of Public something or other. I forget the name, it's been a while. But it was literally a stack of books about this high. They're all blue, they're all heavy. And what I had to do back in the day, which was 24, 25 years ago, is if I wanted all the listings, I certainly couldn't sit there and copy them out by hand. It would have taken forever. So I had to go over to these tabloid-sized photocopiers, 11 by 17, and photocopy the living crap out of them, then go home, look up everything on the internet, find all the web pages, make a list of that, and then figure out who I was going to pitch to. And that's how I got started. But quite literally, I got fired from a job. That's how I got started in writing.
Oh, wonderful. There's these coincidences, right, in lives which are turning out to be, turning points to shift reality. Have you come across sort of lack of self-worth, not knowing, not having clarity in your life that you had to resolve?
Plenty of times, actually. Like, one of the things that's been coming up a lot lately, because I've been having some problems with the direction or getting things to work that I would like it to, is the silver mind technique. Now, when I first saw it years ago, I made a major mistake when I looked at the title. I thought it had to do with mind control. And there was actually a meeting that was taking place in my city. And I remember going there, but there was nobody there. I think one person, and I hung around for a while and I left. And I didn't realize that I'd made a mistake until recently. And what's been happening is, like, I've watched and participated in some of the master classes offered by Mind Valley. And Mind Valley has been putting out this thing to do with the silver mind technique, and talking about this woman by the name of Helen, I keep forgetting her last name, but Haxel or something like that. And she was known as a contest queen because she could enter any contest and win it. And she'd won over 5,000 contests. But she was also, I believe, the marketing manager for Jose Silva of the Silva Mind Technique. And so I've been looking at all this stuff. And then I was chatting with one of my friends in a marketing group, and he sent me a couple of things to do with the Silva Technique last night, which I've been looking at today. And then I wrote to Mind Valley today to ask them about the course, because like they want to teach you stuff about alpha and theta and delta brain patterns. And some of that stuff I'm extremely familiar with because I have a background in meditation. I've done like really fairly advanced stuff. And so alpha for me is super easy. And it's partly because I used a technique out of neurolinguistic programming, which is called an anchor. And so I've been around the block when it comes to a lot of spiritual and psychological stuff. And some of the stuff they were talking about in Mind Valley was healing, like how to heal yourself and others, remote viewing, and other stuff like that. And for me, I'm intensely familiar with all of that. I know how to do it. Psychometry. Psychometry is like when, okay, as an example here, you pick up something, and it could be something like this. And quite often the way that they do it is they wrap it in paper, and you pick it up and you hold it, and you're just supposed to sit with it and get your impressions from it. And the first time I did that was when I was in Sedona, Arizona, and I was at a retreat. Like what was happening is at the time, I'd been doing a lot of spiritual practice stuff. I was studying with a guy by the name of Brian Finney, and I'd learned Tibetan Buddhist meditation. And somewhere along that time, I had what they call a psychic opening. And I experienced something in spiritual circles, they call it a city, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, city
which
consciousness.
is, what's that?
I think it's called city consciousness. Is it not?
Well, no, it wasn't that. If I remember correctly, a city is where you receive, quite literally, they refer to it as magic powers. And like some of them, like people are able to manifest anything they want at the drop of a hat, money, all sorts of things. With me, the magic power that I received is it turned me into a living radar station. I could track anybody anywhere with my mind. And so when I went on this retreat, I remember at one point, the retreat leader said, I want you to find the parking lot. And because we were way in the boonies, we were up at Sedona, we were at a place called Bell Rock. And I just remember looking at him going, okay. And then it took off at a run, literally running through the bush. And I wound up at the parking lot in 5 minutes. No problem. But then other things would happen. Like I remember going to a building in Vancouver. It was a flea market with 360 tables. And a couple of my friends said that they would be there. And I walked in, I was using this tracking thing, and I could feel signals in my mind from opposite ends of the building. And I just remember standing there and thinking, And then I went with the signal that was the strongest. And I went down and I was in this area looking around going, I guess I blew it. And then I turned left, went around the corner, and one of my friends was standing right there. And then we collected him, went to the other end of the building. I found my other friends, same way. So it was really cool. It was fun.
It looks like you have a built-in GPS.
Well, I did for a while. But one of the things about spiritual practice, they said, if you're really serious about it and you encounter something like this, you give it back to the source, because it can be a distraction and it can prevent you from going deeper. And my goal, once I realized what I was doing, or I had an idea of it, was what they call spiritual awakening, and that I had made that my number one goal. So I don't know what I did, but I gave it back, and I've never had it since. But the next thing was this thing called spiritual awakening, was hugely important. And I just kept going through all these disciplines, Kundalini yoga. Actually, not Kundalini yoga. I was a part of a group called Siddha Yoga for many years. And one of the things that they would talk about is Divya Diksha, which is Kundalini initiation, Kundalini awakening. And in Siddha Yoga, what the guru would quite often do in these meetings is walk around with peacock feathers and brushing people with the peacock feathers as a way of giving them initiation. But they also talked about other forms of initiation. And I was reading a book by one of the central teachers, the Swami Muktananda. And as I was reading the book, I saw this tiny red light come out from the pages, and it just went up like this and went into my right eye and it vanished. And it wasn't until sometime later that I discovered that by reading the book, that red light was actually my initiation into the Kundalini yoga aspect of it. And then sometime later, I experienced Kundalini awakening. I was sitting on my meditation cushion one morning, and I felt something burst at the base of my spine. I could see this little snake about 3 inches long, and it wiggled right up my spine at high speed, went right over the top of my head, hit the third eye. And when it hit the third eye, I saw 2 tongues of flame go straight out like that. And then I started experiencing what they call kriyas, which are spontaneous yogic postures. And that became really strong. And then it was also flooded with knowledge. And I was sitting in my meditation room with my girlfriend, and at one point a voice in my head said, give your girlfriend a teaching about one-pointedness, which I knew nothing about prior to that. And I gave her a teaching on one-pointedness. And it was just wild. But that's part of what's been my life has been like with spiritual journey stuff. So when the Silva mind technique stuff came up, like the psychometry and remote viewing and stuff like that, I literally know how to do it. And I was never trained in it. Somebody said, do this, and I would do it. I could do it. And I can't tell you how I knew it. I just could do it. So anyway.
And Nathan, like, if somebody's listening and watching us,
Yeah.
and
They're probably a wee bit confused, I would say.
What if they wanted to have these experiences? Because I think that's a good one to unlock for a lot of people who have the doubting Thomas, so material. You know, a lot of people are stuck in an aspect of the world which is very limited. Then what would be the sort of 3-5 giveaways from you to align, to tap into this new reality, if you could call it
the number one thing is to find a teacher, a genuine teacher who knows this stuff. You see, a major problem in the spiritual world is that there are lots of charlatans, there are lots of fakes. Unfortunately, I had a really good radar, but when this thing started happening, what was happening is I was reading a book by Edgar Casey to do with his abilities. And one of the things that happened is in the book, I wound up learning about an outfit called the Association for Research and Enlightenment. And I discovered they had a meeting in my city of Vancouver. So I went out to the meeting to see if I could get some help from them and some direction. And I remember being at the meeting, and it was my first and last meeting, because one of the women there who was running it was saying, you know, we can't help you with this. What you're talking about it's outside of what we know, but I know of someone. And that's when she referred me to Brian Finney. And that's how I met him, and we became friends over a period of time. But Brian is a practicing Tibetan Buddhist, also very advanced in his practice. He had a spiritual awakening. I know about that. And so he wound up becoming my teacher. And it was just good fortune that way. I was very, very fortunate. But I would say to people, if they want to explore this stuff, they need to start looking into spiritual teachers. So if you were into wanting meditation, I would want, like, one of my favorite spiritual teachers is a guy by the name of Adyashanti, who's in Cupertino, California. He's a Zen Zen teacher. He's also good. I wound up studying with one of the guys that he had passed the Dharma to, which means given permission to teach. His name is Stephen Bodian. He was my personal teacher for 2 years. Stephen is a Zen priest. That's what I was trying to remember. So I studied with him for a couple of years. Stephen is also highly versed in neurolinguistic programming. And when I was working with him, we did a lot of EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprogramming. So I was very fortunate to have really good teachers. I was also, like I said, involved with City Yoga. The current teacher of that is Guru Mai Chidvilasananda. So that's a really good tradition as well. Another thing would be Tibetan Buddhism. Those people really know their stuff when it comes to meditation. So these would be all the major things that I've encountered. And what I kept encountering with some of these people in City Yoga and other places is that they kept saying to me, you're going to have a spiritual awakening. It happened in City Yoga. And actually, Stephen Bodian, who was my teacher, said to me one day, you're done. For you, spiritual awakening is going to happen now. He told me later, he said, we're not supposed to say stuff like that. And I'm going, yeah, I know that, but you said it and I heard it. And there wasn't much he could say about it, but it was true. And I became, for a very long time, I was what I call a hardcore spiritual practitioner. I was meditating every day. I was doing various contemplation exercises, like one of the ones, and it comes from a couple of teachers. Ramana Maharshi, who is considered one of the greatest saints of modern India, one of his core teachings, and it depends on who you talk to, would be like, who am I? Or who is this me that I refer to? So, and I used that teaching a lot, and it was amazing and awesome. Another person who was using it is also died a few years ago, is a guy by the name of Ramesh Balsekar of Advaita.org. And he has a student, Wayne Lickerman, who, I mean, the story of Wayne Lickerman is epic by itself. Wayne Lickerman was a confirmed alcoholic and drug addict, and he was in the middle of a binge trying to pass himself out. And he was in the late stages of alcoholism because he was getting swelling in his legs and stuff like that. And if he had continued much longer, he probably would have died. But all of a sudden, he was in the middle of a binge trying to pass himself out. And all of a sudden, all desire to drink and do drugs vanished. And he couldn't drink anymore. And he couldn't do drugs anymore. And he said, I remember that I was so pissed off. And that led him into a spiritual search, and he wound up meeting Ramesh Balsekar and then following the practices. And within a year, as you said, the process was complete, and he became a spiritual teacher. I've studied some of his stuff over the years. So apologies if I'm going wide and, maybe a little bit convoluted, but these are all the people and sources that I've encountered over the years. And so for your listeners, highly recommend they check them out. Like, my favorite teachers would be Adyashanti, Stephen Bodian. Ramesh was definitely great, loved his stuff, but I kept moving on because, and I guess I was just looking for my teacher. And then one day when I managed to piss off one of my friends with my spiritual questions, she said, you need to talk to this guy. And she gave me Stephen Bodian's website. And I went there and I started looking at it. But the thing that got my attention on the top of his site was a statement that says, enlightenment is your birthright. I thought that was cool. And then I did some research, and then I found out he was connected to Adyashanti as being given the Dharma, as I mentioned earlier. And as soon as I saw that, I knew he was the guy. That was my intuition. And I called him and we started working together. And I tested him several times to see, if he was for real. And he was. And it got to like a central thing that I've learned with this whole stuff is you need to work with a teacher that you can really open up to, that you can fully trust. And I was very fortunate with Stephen. I got to a point where I realized I can trust you. And I let all my defenses down. And after that, whatever he said to me would just go straight in and down or whatever. And I could just accept it. And it was really, really wonderful. And so for those listeners out there or viewers, I mean, they need to find somebody that they can trust. And like I said, I tested Stephen many times, which is maybe not nice to say, but I really wanted to see, are you for real? Will you stay with me? And he did, always. And that's what eventually led to complete trust. And once that happened, I could receive anything he gave me, and I wouldn't fight it. I would just let it come.
So, Nathan, it's amazing how you are describing at times this experience of human transformations where someone creates a space that is so safe that transformations almost happen by themselves because
It can in the right environment. I mean, like one of the things that's happened, I was doing a little bit of this with joint venture stuff, like trying to see if somebody would be right for me. And it was an intention that I did, like I have certain skills, and one of them that's very natural to me is being able to connect and create rapport very, very quickly. And one of the things that I started to do with some interviews that I was doing is I would deliberately create an environment. I would set an intention that our conversation would be like a fireside chat, even though we're on opposite sides of the world on a Zoom call like you and I are right now. And I would just do that. And what started happening is people were saying to me, I just felt so relaxed in our call. You didn't try to sell me anything. And so it seemed to work.
So would you say it's intention and energy that
yes.
drives? It's even hard to put it into words because all of the spiritual awakening is limited by the words that we're trying to. It's terrible, but
yeah,
let's try and
absolutely
put it into
true.
words.
Yeah.
So then there is this energy bubble where the magic could happen.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to spiritual awakening, I mean, I did experience it, and I did experience it shortly after what Stephen said to me. And there were a lot of things that came out of it. And one of them that I can share with your listeners or your viewers is there are no rules when it comes to this. Zero. If anybody says that you have to go through this practice, that practice, you have to go through purification, you have to stand on your head for the next 3 weeks and do the splits or whatever. The one thing I know for sure, that's pure and utter bullshit. Not to be too crude about it, but it is. It's not true. There are no requirements, and this thing called spiritual awakening could happen to, quote, the worst sinner or the greatest saint and everybody in between. There's no such thing as qualifications whatsoever. The only thing that I can see about it, having gone through it, is that if this thing called life wants to wake up to itself through you, wherever you may be, then it's going to happen. And it really doesn't matter much what you say about it or do about it. You could slow it down a little. But at some point, if life really wants to wake up to itself through you, the person, or who you believe yourself to be, then it's going to happen. And like Stephen Bodian, he was telling me, like his own awakening took place and he was driving on the Santa Monica freeway.
This is awesome. And
yeah. So
my case, like I've been, let's say, followed the different teachers and methods, but there was one iconic master I've been sort of following and his lectures, and I had tiny little Satori experiences of
Satori.
Absolutely finding truth. And
sure.
And it didn't resonate in the beginning, but I knew he is real.
Sure.
How do you think it all affects self-worth, or actually
self-worth,
having what they want to experience in life? Like how important this is?
Oh, a lot of that stuff, you're getting into the wormy stuff, okay? And Adyashanti spoke about this, and I've experienced it directly for the last, like ever since this thing called Awakening happened. The way that Adyashanti described it is that he said, like your stuff, your baggage, whatever it is, if I remember correctly, he said it described it as being like stuffed into a well with a veil over top. And that's where you keep all your nasty little secrets or the things that really bother you that you don't want anybody to know about, blah, 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 blah. When awakening happens, that veil gets destroyed. And all of your crap from the past is going to come up and you're going to be forced to deal with it.
Yeah.
And it's not fun and it's not nice. And I can honestly say I've been through a lot of it. He also said that the process takes from 5 to 10 years to complete. While I'm sitting at year 14 thereabouts, and I'm still not done. And even when you do get through this so-called process, this thing called awakening, well, Adyashanti did a video on it. It's called The Journey After Awakening. And the real truth about it, if we're going to be honest, is that it will last you for the rest of your life. There's always going to be something. You'll go deeper. You'll learn things. Things will be revealed, whatever. It's like Stephen Bodie, in the way that he put it, and I'm using the language of the time, but he said that when you have an awakening, it's the equivalent of getting a zip disk downloaded to your brain.
Yeah.
And so you get everything. You get all of the knowledge. And when there's an awakening, there's this huge opening. And you have this incredible thing, and all the stories about bliss and joy and everything else, all of those are true that I can tell you from my own experience. But then after a while, there's a contraction. And a lot of people wind up in this place of, I got it, I lost it. And that creates a lot of pain and suffering. And I spoke to a guy who went through it for 20 years before he started to have some understanding. And so this thing is, I got it, I lost it, has to do with craving and chasing. So if you think you lost it and you start trying to find it and chase and take drugs, none of that works. And you have to let go of all of that. And just like another spiritual thing is this thing called letting go. And you have to let go. And when you let go and you let yourself relax and not try to do anything, that's when it's going to come back. It's paradoxical, right? I remember around that time, I was in a park with a friend of mine, and the park was full of dragonflies flying around. And I said to my friend, I said, I'm going to get one of these dragonflies to land on my hand. She said, you're full of it. And I just held my hand out and I just waited. And within 2 minutes, a dragonfly landed on the palm of my hand. And she just looked at me, she said, going, how the hell did you do that?
I think,
And intention is a big part of this. Intention, clarity, making room, getting out of the way. A huge part of it. You talk to someone like Adyashanti, it's getting out of your own way and stop trying to figure things out, stop trying to find stuff. It's like, again, the letting go thing and making room. Giving space, I mean, I know it sounds trite, that it might sound like a cliche, but it's actually true. And with Stephen, like, because I trusted him so fully, that when this thing finally showed up, it was boom. And it was like one of the things that was astonishing about it afterwards. I remember thinking, what the hell? I've always known this. Where did I ever get the idea that I didn't know this?
Yeah, how could you have forgotten?
It was really weird. I mean, to try and describe it, I'll use like tracing my fingers through the air here, but I was walking along this journey, and then all of a sudden I went on this thing, and this thing is spiritual practice, spiritual journey. But I kept traveling along here and didn't know. And then at one point I came right back to where I started, and all of this vanished, which is spiritual awakening, and path continued. My identity as a spiritual secret instantly vanished. I mean, it was gone in seconds. I didn't even realize it. And I became a different person. My language changed. The way I moved in the world changed. I had all this stuff going on. I remember at the time I thought that I was like a lighthouse. It was so bright, which to some people I would have been.
Mm.
And I remember going out into the world and thinking that everybody would notice, and nobody did, except for one guy. His name is Ray. And I was sitting in a Starbucks like 2 or 3 days after it happened. I was sitting there and Ray was looking at me and he would bring up a spiritual thing and we'd talk about it. This went on for a week. And finally, one day, I forget whether I asked something or he said something and I said something. And we just kind of looked at each other and we got up and went for a walk. And I looked at him as we were walking and I said, "So tell me, Ray, when did it happen for you?" He said, 10 years ago. And he said, "And when you walked in, I instantly knew." And he said, "That's why I wanted to talk to you." So he was the only one in the entire area who could feel it in you.
Wow. And
Yeah.
what the word came to me when you were describing these experiences is trust. To really
Yeah.
trust life, that there is a bigger purpose. There is something way bigger about yourself or your identity that you've haven't realized. But and then also, as you said, there needs to be a breakdown to get the breakthrough, because the old
Well,
need to
yeah.
shatter and the fake
Well,
identities that we take on have to go.
maybe. I don't necessarily know that that's true. I mean, what comes to mind, two words: openness and receptivity, and along with trust. And when I've spoken to people about it, it's like that's what really needs to be there. And it's not necessarily a breakdown of personality or anything else or all these things. I mean, that's what happened to me, and everybody's journey is going to be different. Like Ramesh Balsekar, the way he described it was climbing a staircase. And whether it's just 10 steps or 300 steps, you can't stop climbing. And from the 9th to the 10th step, or from the 299th to the 300th step, you never know when this change is going to happen. And he says, and it's always a surprise. And I would agree with that. Because
So
when it happened, I just remember thinking, you must be kidding me.
and
Like,
and
really, it was like that. It's like, no way. Like, seriously. And I know it sounds silly perhaps, but there were just all these things and more things that happened afterwards, more awakenings that happened. I had another big one about another 7 or 8 years later. I was modeling Eckhart Tolle. See, that brings up another really important point. Modeling, which is a term out of neurolinguistic programming. And so I was modeling Eckhart Tolle, I was modeling Adyashanti, and I noticed one time when I did a video, I was doing something and I was listening to myself speak in the background in this video. I thought, man, I sound like Adyashanti. But that's what modeling does. But if you do it for long enough and you start to take on the certain things to do with the teacher, sooner or later, there's going to be a point. I can't tell you where it is, but there's going to be a shift, a change. And that happened to me one night with Eckhart Tolle. I was listening to a teaching and then I experienced a massive shift. And in that, I experienced what I refer to as the teachings of silence. And many spiritual teachers will say that the best teachings are given in silence, and I would agree. But when this happened, my thinking, my suffering at the time dropped by about 90%. I felt this huge plane of silence rise up inside me. My thinking almost completely stopped. And I went into this really long silent meditation. And after that, I'd be sitting every day for hours every day in virtually no thought at all. And then I learned through, because of NLP, spontaneously started to reverse engineer it. So I could say to people, because a lot of people, they complain they think too much, right? And that was my problem too. And NLP taught me a technique to stop thinking, but the other one was with Eckhart Tolle and doing that practice. And I was just listening to a video, listening to a video. It was just a picture of him on YouTube with an audio track. And specifically, it was, I forget which book, but it was called Transforming Illness and Suffering was the title. So your readers can look it up and find it. And so I was just listening to him speak, reading this chapter basically, when the transformation happened. And then after that, like one of the most advanced teachings of Eckhart Tolle, 2 words: stop thinking.
Yeah.
And if you get to a point like that, you can literally do it. You can, like, there are a lot of meditation teachers out there who will say, you cannot stop thinking, you can't turn your mind off. I'm here to say, sorry, you didn't go deep enough.
Probably,
You didn't study with the right teachers. You most definitely can, because thinking is learned. You didn't grow up thinking. You learned how to think. You were taught how to think.
So Nathan,
anyway, yeah.
Like I do a lot of work with modeling because I believe that is the shortcut to take on a new level of consciousness, a new level of self-image and self-worth, because that is almost like putting on another hat or just moving into another level of version of being or leadership. Tell me, because you've done all of these amazing experiences, awakening. How are you now? Since remember, you may have heard this, that before spiritual awakening, chop wood, and after awakening, you will chop wood. Like, how do you bring this into, how are you serving people these days when you're not sort of going too spiritual and you come back to mundane,
it's just
daily things?
It's a good question. I mean, I've just been finding my way. I mean, one of the things that happened, the spiritual awakening part of it was so powerful that for a very long time, I couldn't relate to anybody. I couldn't talk to people. I didn't know how to function in the world. And I'm actually, to a degree, I'm still learning that. I actually wound up in a very bad place. Not long after the spiritual awakening, severe bullying and harassment from a number of different sources, and it scrambled me. I couldn't find answers, and it just messed me up really, really badly for 12 years. And I wound up nearly starving to death several times, in poverty. I was homeless for a while, sleeping in my car for 3 months. Finally got off the street. But what happened was, like, one of the things that people will say to do with this whole kind of stuff is that, well, spiritual practice is everything and psychology is crap. Well, no, they're not. Psychology and spiritual practice go together, and it's an absolute must that you have both. And what happened about 1.5 years ago, I was here at my girlfriend's place. I woke up at 2:00 in the morning. And even though I was terrified and had been for over a decade to do with the abuse, a lot of it was abuse to do with financial ruin, to do with Canada Revenue Agency, and another source very close to me: financial ruin, death threats, lawsuit threats, major abuse, and it almost killed me at one point. With one source, I became very ill, and when I recovered, I booted a whole bunch of people out of my life. But the fear continued. I couldn't face it. It was just too much. But one night, 2:00 in the morning, I woke up and I thought, I cannot stand this anymore. I'm going to, and I basically forced myself out of it. And what I did at the time is I started looking for teachings to do with NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. I found a guy, I think it's called NLP Jim. And it had to do with a question, to question yourself, to see if your assumptions about whatever in life were true. And it wasn't actually a question, it was one word. If. What if I've made a mistake? What if I'm wrong? What if all of this isn't true? And with that, I was able to bring myself out of the nightmare. And later, when I spoke to a good friend of mine, his name is Rick Schnabel, he's an NLP master coach in Australia. I told him what I had done, and he said, congratulations. He said, sometimes the way out is you have to force yourself through it like you just did. And that's what I did. So I started with the if, then I started finding other stuff. And then also at that time, I also really realized I was very seriously ill, and I didn't realize it. I had severe brain fog to do with the illness. I was suffering from liver damage, first stage of kidney failure, major problems. And my girlfriend took me to a homeopath, and he gave me some medicine. Within a couple of days, I felt almost normal. And then gradually started getting better and better and better. And my energy levels returned to normal. I've been reversing some very serious long-standing problems that I've had. But part of what happened is the fear was so severe, I couldn't take care of myself. I just couldn't. And I let a lot of stuff go, and I'm still dealing with some residual issues. But most of what was there has been healed or changed. And it was when I just finally got to a point where I said, I cannot stand living like this anymore. I don't care how afraid I am. I'm going to push myself through this. I'm going to force myself through it. And remember my thinking at the time, I'm going to force myself through it, and I'm going to find a way no matter what. And that's when I started to come out of it.
Well, that is 10 out of 10 commitment, probably. Enough pain, enough.
Yeah, it just got to a point where I just couldn't stand it for a single second more. And around that time, when I came out of it, my girlfriend said, you don't look good. She actually told me later that she said that you were gray, and it was obvious you were really sick. And she said, I was really afraid that you were going to die. And she told me that.
Yeah.
So that's how severe it was.
That what if question, I think it really opens a new door into another reality for a lot of people. Well, obviously it needs the context, but there's always a bigger picture.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that happened is I started meditating again, started doing the practices again that I had learned from years before. I meditate every day, at least once, sometimes twice. I discovered the teachings of Dr. Joe Dispenza, which are really, really lovely. But in the middle of that, like for the last 2-3 months, I kept getting this video popping up on my YouTube with Vishen Lakhiani talking about Silva. And I actually started finally watching most of the video today, but I spoke with a friend of mine in my business group, and he gave me some of that. And a good chunk of what they talk about in there is stuff I'm very familiar with, but the stuff where I've had the biggest trouble with in recent years has to do with manifesting, and also has to do with feeling stable inside, because this whole abuse cycle, which it had been going on my entire life, it only stopped 5 years ago, that particular cycle, to do with Revenue Canada, as well as this other source. It stopped when this one person died. And when she died, it ended. But I was still stuck in this fear cycle for another year, or not year, 4 years, before I finally managed to force myself out of it, which is why we're able to talk like this right now. And so I've just been deepening the practice, learning, like healing all of these things that got severely hurt inside me. And just looking at these different things, like at one point I hired a coach, his name is Matt Tait, T-A-I-T. He's one of the students who works under Rick Schnabel in Australia. And I did 10 sessions with him that were very, very helpful. And then, of course, the Dispenza stuff, and then the Mind Valley stuff. And I'm going to sign up for the Silva course in the next week or so and start doing those practices, because it's really obvious to me that even with all this training, there are things that I've missed, especially to do with manifesting around money. That's always been a problem. And I know where it comes from. It comes from my past. And for everybody who's watching this, Your problems are from the past somewhere. And some people will say, well, past life, I'm sorry, but I don't believe in that. But it's just because of what happened to me spiritually when I had this thing called spiritual awakening, a lot of things were revealed.
Mm.
And things that I had held in a certain way, I now realize are fiction. And what I thought was real was not, or is not. And
Mm.
so it was a hell of a shock. Like one of my favorite things was time travel, which I now know isn't real.
Mm.
So bye-bye to that illusion. Yeah, so it changed a lot of things. Anyway, please go ahead.
So Nathan, I mean, let's give you the stage to promote yourself. Like, how do you help people these days? Or what services
Sure,
are you running? So at least people hearing you, they know how
sure.
you could help in the real, well, it's not real, but let's say in the material world. What
Yeah, the
problems are
material
you
world.
solving for businesses, for people?
I'm working with people in email because one of the things that I learned 2005, 2006 is that email is one of the most important things. Now, I've had a lot of success in email, but not in the way that I'm going to speak of. I mean, when I became a freelance writer, I had to do submissions to magazines. That was email, cold email, actually, except that it
Mm.
wasn't entirely cold because the people on the other end were expecting to receive these messages from people they didn't know, like me. And I sent out thousands of these for writing over the years. And so the internet marketing thing is also using email, but in a different way. It's to build a list of contacts and to be able to sell them stuff. And so when I got into it, I wrote a manual. It's called the Photoshop Companion. And then later I started shopping it around. I learned about joint ventures, and I found a joint venture with a Corel Corporation in Canada, rewrote the manual to brand it to their software. And they started marketing my manual. Their software is what they call a value add. So I made a flat fee every time they sold it. And in the book that I wrote, I also put several calls to action to sign up for my list for email. And in return for signing up, I'd give them 2 hours of video tutorials.
Mm.
And so that's what I did. That's how I got started. And when I came out of this twilight state that I was in, this terror state, more like it, when I finally came out of it, it's like realizing, yeah, but email is everything, and I'm going to start rebuilding it. So because if you look at it, like a lot of people say email is dead, email doesn't work. Well, yeah, it does, but you need to know how to communicate with your target audience.
Mm.
And so I've been in a lot of meetings as of late, and there was one major thing that happened. I watched a video by a guy by the name of Caleb O'Dowd. Now, Caleb O'Dowd had the great fortune to study under a guy by the name of Gary Halbert, who called himself the Prince of Print. And he was one of the greatest copywriters who ever lived. And within a year, Caleb became a millionaire at the age of 23. And so Caleb was doing this thing about email, and he said something which really struck me very hard. And for the people who are watching this, if you're wanting to learn about email, one of the things you need to know is, well, there are a couple of ways that you could get into it. You could get into it by affiliate marketing or marketing somebody else's stuff, or you could market your own stuff. And where I got into it was marketing my own stuff. I bypassed the affiliate thing completely. And so, but one of the things that Caleb was talking about is you need to attract the right audience. And when I heard this, it was like the equivalent of, like, you see me with my hands trying to position them against like this little triangle with my hands. Imagine in the center of that is a chunk of solid gold. And when I listened to Caleb, that's what it felt like he had given me. So to elaborate, one of the things that many marketers do is they create something called a lead magnet. Well, I discovered there's a right way to do it and a wrong way to do it.
Got
And
it.
so the wrong way to do it is to write a lead magnet with a title like the top 10 things that internet marketers need to know.
Mm.
So you write something like that, you're going to wind up with a lot of people on your list, but they're going to be the tire kickers, the looky-loos, and the people without any money. So if you try and sell them anything, it's not going to work. Your list is going to fall flat. And you'll say, yeah, this email marketing, this internet marketing is crap. It doesn't work. I said, no, the problem is you approached it the wrong way. What you really need to do is you're looking for what they call the buyer prospect, or what Kay would call the buyer prospect. So how do you do that? So you would write another lead magnet with the title something like, how super affiliates generate 100 plus sales per day with YouTube ads. So when you do that, you immediately you eliminate everybody without money, because YouTube ads are expensive. So when you look at, or you think about the title that I just read off to you, the people who are going to be paying attention are the ones who want to become super affiliates. They want to make that 100 plus sales per day. They want to know about YouTube ads. They know that YouTube ads are expensive. They're not easy to work with. And if you address all of that stuff in your lead magnet and you give them that stuff, they're far more likely to sign up for your list, and they're far more likely to want to buy from you. And that's the key to this whole thing. So you've got to think about the titling. You've got to think about, how am I going to attract this person? So you use a title like that, you will attract the buyer prospect, and you will more than likely start having success. So titles and the intention and the direction are everything. Do it the right way and you'll succeed. Do it the wrong way, you won't make any money.
So you are the guy who could turn a cold email into building that relationship into probably a sale, and also be able to help anyone around messaging and have that.
Yeah. Well, actually, what's been happening with that is back in the day when I started this, like way back, I bought a program from Frank Kern, and back at the day it was called Mass Control. Mass Control came with a piece of email marketing software called the 4-Day Cash Machine. And I set it up. I set it up pretty much exactly as described. The only thing I changed was my product. And I came up with the pricing, and I built a little page that went with it. And I marketed it to my audience. Now, I didn't have a very big list, only 600 people. But I ran this thing, and it was like, it was like I was Harry Potter or something. I waved my magic wand and poof, money appeared. Quite literally, it did. It literally showed up in my bank account like magic. And it went for 4 days, and I think I made $5,000 in 4 days from a list of only 600 people with an offer of $17.
Amazing.
I kid you not. It was only $17, and I made that much money. And I just went, wow, this is awesome. And so I ran it again like 2 or 3 more times, and I made money every single time I did it. But the effect of it diminished over time, because I was kind of killing my list by doing it. And I needed to give the list a rest. But it worked. It worked. And now, like, I've been following Frank Kern again, and he's created well, how do I put it? He has partnered with a company called Go High Level. And for the last 2-3 months, I've been hearing about them almost every single day. This is a company you need to work with to do with email and marketing. They've got a great reputation, lots of people involved with them, and many internet marketers. And Frank Kern signed up with them and ported all his intellectual property onto this Go High Level, and he's created a white label interface that he calls Rainmaker AI. So if somebody wants to work with me, the number one thing I'm going to say to them is, we need to get you a license for this, and then I am going to build whatever your integrations are into Rainmaker AI, or through another integration he's got called HL Kern, which stands for High Level Kern, and just build whatever it is. Because there's another thing that came up, which is to do with SMS, and something called a customer reactivation campaign. And I wound up talking to a guy this morning about it, pitching him on it. And he was asking me about it. And I said to him, well, I have to tell you something important. I've never done this before. I have access to all the software. I know how to make it work, but I haven't done this before. And I said to him, normally, if I was experienced in this, I would say it would be $2,500 for a month, and I'll set up everything for you and we'll get it working. But since I haven't used this, I'll make you an offer, $1,200. And 500 of that is for the software and a license that I have to generate for you. But then after that, I'll work with you, because within the software, it's like WordPress in some ways, because you have files, right? Various files, and you can just copy them and rename them, right?
Mm.
And I said to the guy, the way works is an SMS sequence is, it's like a chat, you go ManyChat, or you're in Facebook and somebody gets you in a chat and they ask a question and you answer, and depending on your answer, it gives you a scripted response. Same
Yeah.
thing.
Setup.
And I said to him, the way to test this would be with like 100 contacts at a time, phone numbers, and we verify them and make sure they're good. And then we test them with different opening messages. And I said, the one thing I can tell you for certain about copywriting is that opening sentence, or that opening headline, is everything.
Mm.
It's like 80% of your message right there. And I said to him, what we could do is like an A/B test thing. We could run a test with 100, see how well they respond. And we try another opening line and see what happens. And we could test it until we find something that works really well. And then I can build it out for you. And I said to him, to give you an example, like I've had a couple of clients as of late, and I did it for myself as well, is I created a simple opt-in. Now, opt-in, like what I was doing is shortcutting the process of internet marketing. A lot of people will say, well, you need to write a long form sales page or even a short form.
Mm.
Well, I was just doing an opt-in. And it was based on an idea that I had, and I didn't even know if it would work. But the idea was a really attention-getting headline, an opening sentence, 3 bullet points, closing sentence, call to action, and a little button at the bottom, sign up here. And so I did it for this client. And I remember thinking if I got a 25 to 30% opt-in rate, I would be happy. I got 62%.
Powerful.
And it was just like, wow, that's cool. And
But
then I did it again, but I changed the headline, and I changed some of the body copy, and I used what they call solo ad providers. So the first one I did it with one person. Second time I did it with something else. I did it all by myself with no help, and I got a 78% conversion. And it's just a text ad, no images, no fancy stuff, just text.
Copy the right way.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well,
Yeah. So
well,
that's about it. But so like with Frank Kearney's got all these campaigns, like one called the Magic Funnel, which you would recommend for pretty much anything. There's an appointment getting sequence. If somebody wants appointments for their business, they're doing email. The customer reinvention thing, which is using SMS. So, and this would work for somebody who's a professional, like a doctor, lawyer, dentist, salon owner, someone like that. And if they have these phone numbers, all they need to do is plug them into the software, check them to make sure that they're valid, work with the business owner to put the scripts together, and then just run it and see what happens. And usually these people are looking for appointments, but they might be looking for sales.
powerful.
Either way, and you could just run it. And it's the big key to all of this, very important for the people who are watching this. Like they would say, well, I'm going to run this. Well, do it small, do it low scale. Like if you're doing some of the stuff that I did, like when I was testing it with 100 to 200 people at a time. And if you're saying, well, why would you do that? To make sure that your copy works before you start to scale. Really, really important. It's something I didn't know years ago. If I'd known this, I would have been involved with this a lot and deeper and sooner than I was. So it's a very important point for the people who are watching this, but you test it. Same with the SMS, you would test it with maybe 50 to 100 people at a time. See what happens. If it doesn't work the way you want, try something else. It's all about testing. Everything is about testing.
Yeah.
And if you learn just that one thing to do with internet marketing, and you don't try to throw the entire kitchen sink and everything at your campaign, and it goes kaboom and bombs, go, oh no, and somebody winds up hating you for it, it's because, no, you tried to move too fast. Go slow, build it slow, take your time, try these different things, see what works, and then start scaling. And
wonderful.
that's it.
Nathan, we're coming up to the hour, and was a
Sure.
deep conversation. I would love you to drop your details so I can
Yeah,
put
sure.
all of these, your contacts and wherever people can find you under the video. Is there
Sure.
anything else that you wanted to share before we say goodbye? No?
Other than thank you for having me on your show, really isn't anything. I mean, we've covered a great deal of stuff and far wider than the whole internet marketing thing. But no, I mean, for people into internet marketing, really worth learning joint ventures, but also really important to know that it can take quite a bit of work to set it up. I mean, when I did it initially, I got lucky, but after that, it was a lot of hard work and not anywhere nearly as successful. But again, the email and the SMS, this is where it is. Like, if you build an email list and you learn how to speak to your audience in the right way, and you just keep building this over time, you'll never have to worry about income again.
Yeah, it becomes
That much I'm quite sure of.
well amazing. It really becomes a gold mine. Thanks very much,
It
Nathan.
does.
It
You're
was
welcome.
amazing to connect with you. And guys,
Likewise.
all details will be under the video to reach out to Nathan, ask some questions, and get his magic tricks, get his
Magic
secret
trick.
weapons.
There isn't really a magic trick. It just has to do with paying attention and following people. And that's like all this other stuff. I mean, just being open. I'll leave you with one thing. The late Richard Hatch, formerly of Battlestar Galactica, I met him at a science fiction convention. And we wound up speaking a bit. And one of the things he said to me is that if you approach life with an open heart, you will do okay. You will do well. Yeah.
That's a powerful message for last. Thanks very much, Nathan.
You're welcome. My
Great to
pleasure,
connect.
Andre.
Have a beautiful day.
You too. Thank you.